everyone. Dr. Vela again here. This screencast is going to concern secondary source analysis, okay? So remember the last screencast was for primary sources, and you had two options for that. And for the secondary sources, there's only one option, okay? This is the way I want you to do it. I am going to be sharing this file that I'm going to walk you through during this screencast. I'll share this file on our Canvas page so you have access to it. And it really is a template, okay? Which means you don't necessarily have to answer every question here. Although in the top part, I do want you to answer every question. But in the other parts, as I'll discuss, I really want you to just think about what's most relevant for your project. Okay, so let me explain here my justification for doing this with secondary sources. Why don't we just do note cards with secondary sources or the Mr. Marsh research packet? Well, there's one simple reason. I've found over the years that when students approach their secondary sources by making a research packet or note cards, they end up falling into the trap of what I call quote hunting, where they don't really understand or engage the author's argument. They're just looking for good quotes that make sense to them and that they want to use. I want to suggest to you that might have been useful sophomore year. As we get to junior and senior year, we want you to engage with these secondary sources on the level of argument, not just looking for quotes, okay? So we want to avoid the quote hunting and really focus on the argument. And that's what this is all about. So if you look at it in this smaller view, you see that I basically divide up a sheet of paper into thirds. Now, obviously, many of you will do this on a computer, but back in the day, we used to do this on paper, and I would tell students just to fold their page in thirds. Which of course was very challenging for students because, especially my freshmen, my goodness. I have some who are still working on it. But the idea here is whether you type it or handwrite it, it should fit entirely on one page, the front side of one page. This should not be an extensive outline of a secondary source. Okay, it is instead a synopsis of the argument, what we call in philosophy a schematic of the argument. So here's the three sections. In the top third, I want you to determine the research question being asked by the scholar you are discussing, right? So right here at the top, sorry, I should have said that first. Right here at the top, you should put the author and the title of the secondary source. You don't need the full MLA citation there, but you should put the author and title, okay? After you get author and title up there, you then go to the top section. And in the top section, this is where you're laying out the basics of the argument. What is the controversy or question? Remember, this is the author's controversy or question. It might not be the same as your research topic. Right? Your research topic might relate to this, but it might not be identical, okay? So, give the research question for the secondary source, whether it's like Collard or Dodds or, any of the other of the numerous sources you guys are finding right now, okay? So that's step one. What is that author's research question? What is he or she trying to answer? Second, what is the author's thesis? What is their answer to the research question? Third, what alternate views on the question or controversy are considered? This is the antithesis part, okay? Now, maybe the author doesn't consider any counterarguments, and if that's true, shame on him or her. But if they do consider them, you should put them in there. Who are they arguing against? And if they don't give any counter-arguments, then you should try to come up with your own. What alternate views are possible? What alternate answers to the research question are possible? Okay? So that's your top third, gentlemen. There's three things you need. You need a research question, a thesis, and an antithesis. And remember, that's all for the secondary source, not your research question, thesis, and antithesis, but the source. Okay? All right. The second section, the middle section, is the evidence section. The evidence section is obviously where you're going to focus on the evidence, but I want you to think first about the kind of evidence and the methodology used. So, is the evidence, for example, primarily textual? Are they textualist? Are they doing formalism? Is the evidence presented primarily biographical or historical? When I say what methodology, maybe the methodology being used is Marxist analysis or Freudian analysis or feminist or queer theory analysis. So maybe that's part of their methodology. Okay? Now you might also think about, what does the author accept as evidence? What does the author reject? What kinds of things do they consider persuasive evidence? What kinds of things do they either ignore or dispute as evidence? Okay? So that's also another very helpful thing to think about. This section down here is a really important thing to focus on. When you're focusing on the evidence, you always want to try to keep in mind how the evidence supports the author's research question, or how the evidence relates to the question and supports their thesis. How the evidence is relevant to the question and supports the thesis. Okay? And then lastly, this is kind of the counter-argument part. Does the author consider any evidence that is contrary to their thesis, that contradicts or counters their thesis? And if so, how does that author try to explain that evidence away? How do they try to deal with contradictory evidence? Okay? So, again, I don't want you to fill up this whole don't go multiple pages here. Even if you're reading a JSTOR article or a chapter in a book, keep this confined to the middle third of the front side of a page. All right? Okay, the last section, the bottom third, is the implications of this secondary source. The so what section. So, here are some things to consider in the so what section. And the basic idea here is, so what? So why does this matter? Let's say this author's secondary source analysis is true. Let's say their argument is valid. So what? What does it matter if it's true or false? What controversies or problems are explained by the author's argument? What controversies still remain? Are there implications beyond the research question addressed? And then finally, I think it's worth incorporating your stance on the author's argument. Would you defend, challenge, or qualify this author's argument? Okay? So, these are the three things you're going to do for two of your secondary sources. And I only want you to do this for two. You are welcome to do it for more than two, obviously. That's more work for you, but you're welcome to do it. But what I would focus on, gentlemen, is determining which two primary sources you expect to engage with significantly. Okay, so some primary sources you might only mention on one page or in one paragraph, but other secondary sources you're going to use extensively. You might use them on multiple pages. You might even mention them in your introduction, right? There could be a lot of ways you use them. So, focus on the two, maybe three secondary sources that are going to be the most central to your argument, and do this analysis of those. And remember what our overall goal here is, gentlemen. Our goal is that we want a research paper in which you guys engage the arguments of other scholars. Not just quote hunting, not just cherry picking quotes, but you are a part of the academic enterprise in which you are engaging with another scholar's argument. And the best way to engage with another scholar's argument, gentlemen, is to know it and understand it. All right? So that's what we have here. You're doing the note cards. That was in the other screencast. And in this one, you are doing secondary source analyses of 2 different secondary sources. All right? I think these will be very helpful for you. I think they will enrich your project. And I got to tell you guys, I think this is one of the best lessons I ever learned in college, was how to use secondary sources. Because I was also someone who did a lot of quote hunting when I was in high school. And it took me a while to learn how to really engage other scholars in their arguments. And this was a step on the path for me. And that's why I share it with you. All right, gentlemen, you be well, and good luck as you work on this. Dr. Vela, out.